There are athletes we celebrate endlessly. Jordan, Ali, Serena, Messi. Icons whose legacies are repeated so often, their names feel etched into the DNA of sport. And then, there are the others, the ones who changed the game, not with the flashiest moves or the biggest contracts, but with something far more powerful: impact. Today, we tell the story of an athlete who altered the course of sports history, yet rarely finds a place in the conversation. A name that should be shouted but is often left unspoken. A figure whose legacy doesn't just live in trophies, but in every step forward sports have taken since. This is the story of Tommie Smith, the man who sacrificed glory to speak truth on the world's biggest stage and whose actions changed sports and society forever. Tommie Smith wasn't just fast, he was lightning with a heartbeat. Born in 1944 in Texas and raised in California, Smith grew up in a time when America was wrestling with its soul. Segregation was law. Racism wasn't hidden. It was systemic. And opportunity for black athletes was limited, conditional, and often transactional. But Smith? He was the kind of runner that made stopwatches question themselves. By the mid-60s, Smith had already broken multiple world records. Some of them unofficial because the timing equipment at the time literally couldn't keep up. He became the first man to run 200 meters in under 20 seconds on a straight track. That's not just history. That's physics defying. At San Jose State, he teamed up with John Carlos, another sprinter who would later share the spotlight. And the struggle. They weren't just teammates, they were brothers in arms. And together, they would become part of something far bigger than a podium finish. If you want to understand what made Smith's story so powerful, you have to understand the world in 1968. The Vietnam War was raging. Martin Luther King Jr. had just been assassinated. Cities across America were erupting in protests, rage, and pain. Racial inequality wasn't just a topic, it was a firestorm. In the sports world, pressure was mounting. Black athletes were demanding to be seen not just as entertainment, but as human beings with voices. Enter the Olympic Project for Human Rights, a movement that aimed to protest racism in sport and society. It wasn't just about winning medals. It was about using the platform to speak out when the world was watching. And at the center of it stood Tommie Smith and John Carlos. October 16, 1968, Mexico City, the Olympics. Tommie Smith wins gold in the 200 meters, breaking the world record with a blistering time of 19.83 seconds. John Carlos finishes third, earning the bronze. But what happened on that podium? That was the moment that would define them forever. As the American national anthem began to play, Smith and Carlos stepped onto the podium. Not just as athletes, but as activists. They each raised a black-gloved fist into the air. They stood barefoot, symbolizing poverty. Smith wore a black scarf for black pride. Carlos had beads to represent those who had been lynched. And both of them bowed their heads, not in shame, but in solemn resistance. It wasn't just a protest. It was a symbol of dignity, of defiance, of a cry for justice. That image, the silent, powerful stance, would become one of the most iconic in sports history. But it came at a cost. The Olympic officials didn't waste time. Smith and Carlos were kicked out of the Olympic Village within hours. They were suspended from Team USA and forced to leave Mexico. But that was just the beginning. Back home, they were vilified by the press, labeled as traitors. They received death threats, their careers were blackballed, and they struggled to find steady work. Imagine being world-class athletes, Olympic medalists, and suddenly being treated like criminals. That's what they endured. Tommie Smith once said, "We were saying, we are human beings. I cannot stand and sing the anthem. I cannot salute the flag. I know that I am being true to what I believe." But the world didn't care. Not at the time. He was just a man, tired of injustice, using the one moment he had to say something that the world couldn't ignore. It's strange how history works. We remember box scores and championship banners. But sometimes, we forget the moments that mattered most. Tommie Smith changed history with a gesture. Not for applause, not for legacy, but because it was right. He wasn't chasing a brand deal. He wasn't doing it for social media. He stood up, or rather, stood still with a fist in the air, because silence would have meant surrender. And maybe that's why we don't talk about him enough, because his story doesn't fit into a highlight reel. It's uncomfortable, it's political, but it's also one of the most courageous acts in sports history. There's a certain tragedy in Smith's story. He gave the world a symbol. He stood for millions, and he paid the price, quietly, privately, over years of lost opportunities. But there's also beauty in it, because today, athletes don't have to choose between excellence and expression. Because of people like him, they can be both. Tommie Smith wasn't just an Olympic champion. He was a cultural force. And whether or not the world wanted to listen, he made sure it heard him. So the next time we talk about sports history, when we rattle off the names of icons, champions, and game changers, remember, greatness isn't always loud. It doesn't always come wrapped in gold medals or billion-dollar endorsements. Sometimes, greatness looks like a man standing barefoot, head bowed, fist raised, knowing full well the world may never forgive him for it. Tommie Smith wasn't trying to be famous. He wasn't chasing legacy. He was chasing justice. In a time when even whispering about it could cost you everything. And it did. He didn't just break a record. He shattered the illusion that athletes exist in a vacuum. He proved that sports don't just entertain. They echo, they influence, they challenge, they speak. His silent protest spoke volumes, not just to those watching in 1968, but to generations that followed. To the athletes today who kneel, speak out, and demand better. That spark started with Tommie. He stood in stillness so that others could move forward. And maybe that's the true test of a hero. Not how loud the world cheers for you, but how deep your actions resonate when the cheering stops. So say his name, not as a footnote, not as a forgotten protest. Say it as part of the foundation, because Tommie Smith didn't just change a race. He changed the course of sports, of activism, and of history itself. We just have to remember. And finally, let this be a reminder. Statues fade, headlines disappear, but courage echoes forever.